My name's Jeff Riseley. I'm a four-time Olympian, 800 and 1500 metre runner, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
Jeff Riseley, this has been a long time coming, but it's an absolute treat to welcome you to the Physical Performance Show. It's been a big 12 months for you, so welcome along.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Where do you start with your career, Jeff? Spanned 15 years, 4 Olympic Games, 6 national titles. My gosh, it's been a long one. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, just sort of managing the whole transition at the moment and getting used to, life, not sort of getting up and running every morning and having that mentality where, you're always trying to achieve things. So that's taken a little while just to quieten the brain and enjoy some of the simpler things in life. But just enjoying sort of some new challenges and I guess, just sort of seeing, what is next, which I'm, even now still trying to figure out.
Gosh, it's a big topic, and let's sort of sit there for a moment. The transition out of elite sport, particularly such a long career where you've been involved in athletics since you started around 7 years of age there in Melbourne, and had your career best season as a 34-year-old. You said you're trying to enjoy it. Are you able to enjoy it, or is it just tough? Like it's not easy.
Yeah, no, it's not easy. And I kind of thought I was a little bit more prepared than most, like after Rio, I got a sports consulting role part-time just because I didn't have that experience. And I kind of quickly realized business wasn't really for me. So then I jumped across into a master's, which I'm sort of finishing. I just have an internship left that I'm doing at Princeton with their cross-country team sort of later in this year. And you kind of jump out and you sort of think things will just happen, and they just don't really happen, and things take time and just sort of trying to find the role that you kind of want, especially in high performance. It's just a bit, I wouldn't say it's niche, but it's not like you study law and you go and you do a clerkship and then you do the grad program and then you're kind of a lawyer. There's not really a kind of a clear kind of transition, So spending a lot of time on sports people, just seeing kind of what jobs and stuff are out there. And I think once you're kind of in the industry and you kind of know how it works, it'll sort of get a bit easier. But it's just, there's also that sort of feeling like we're a bit perfectionist athletes. And we feel like we sort of, you go into the next career and you feel like you need to have your master's, you need to kind of know what you're doing before you get into it. But that's sort of not really how it works. Like, there's got to be a certain amount of time learning on the role. So it's sort of, trying to take that expectation away as well. And, just sort of throw myself into stuff. So, looking forward to the Princeton opportunity. So I'm sort of heading off in 6 to 7 weeks, sort of see the NCAA system, learn under Jason Vigilante, who's just, one of the great US coaches, and Princeton have one of the greatest programs. I think they got 5th at NCAA on the men's side this year, which is pretty incredible when you think of the admission standards and I guess, the field that they can recruit from. So looking forward to just throwing myself into there and seeing what the sports department's like and learning a little bit more about strength conditioning and sort of the rehab side of things and the programming, just so I can sort of get my brain a bit better across that. So it just takes time, and athletes, we're not good with time. We like things yesterday. So it's just embracing time on the golf course and, sort of later start mornings, because when I do start working, that'll all disappear.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, it's, I think, well articulated, embracing time. What did flag that it was time for your career? We're seeing athletes perform, the mindset, I think, is slowly shifting, that past a certain chronological age means that, you're done. We're seeing that shift. But what were the inner murmurings for yourself, Jeff, that were kind of like flagging, maybe I need to start thinking about this next phase? Because you were performing well.
It's interesting that you sort of talk about there's that chronological shift, but I don't think we're really seeing it in sprinting or middle distance. It's a little bit more the marathon and those kind of events, which I think are a little bit more, we obviously see it like more on the aerobic side and that like capacity. And you obviously sort of see it a little bit in like the NFL with Brady, but like I think that's very much a skill thing. But I think the key is just like still having that mental sort of side where you have that like real hunger and burning to turn up and want to be the best, and just kind of keep leaving no stone unturned. And I just kind of got to that point where, the body just kind of wasn't doing what I kind of wanted it to do. And recovery was longer, and just kind of lost that fire and that want to stand on a start line and look at the guys next to me and be like, I really want to beat you. I kind of felt like that time had kind of passed, and I just couldn't do the things that I kind of needed to do. I sort of wish I was sort of 28, 27, 28 back, like 2012 and even 2015 when I was in really good shape and the body was good, and I was able to go like head to head with Pete. That would have been awesome. But like I was training with him and I just couldn't do the things that he was doing, and the body wasn't recovering. And and also the sport's tough, like financially especially. There comes a point where you got to move on with life and you got to, get on with it. Like it probably cost me 20K my own money to make the Olympics last year. And I got nothing back. So that's only sustainable for a certain amount of time. So there's just sort of a few factors, and it was, I'm glad I kept going because I was 50-50 post Tokyo, but like, I had one, like, as you said, I had one of the best years in my career, and unfortunately I didn't get to control the outcome of my last race because I had to jump 2 guys. And, I would have loved to have gone back to Europe and kept competing while I was in such good shape, but I couldn't because I went back to Europe and then I was no guarantee to be able to get home, and I would probably needed maybe a business class flight and then, quarantine, and there was all that sort of fiasco. So it was just sort of a really challenging kind of time to hang him up. And I'm definitely glad I kept going because I kind of got to the season and I really knew I was done. And I just kind of got to enjoy the last few races, even though like the results weren't great. It was just fun to enjoy them with my group and see the other boys run well as well.
And it's a fantastic image on your gallery of yourself and Peter Bowl, the final embrace, if you like, and your caption's a good way to say goodbye to my athletics family, from a competition sense, that is. But so it sounds like there's a few coalescing factors, if you like, financial considerations, some of that hunger and desire that you'd always had was starting to wane a little. And then you mentioned the body. With all that you've achieved, Jeff, in that 15-year career, it's a tough question, one that no doubt you've been asked before, but is there one performance amongst all those national titles and 4 Olympic Games, and you're one of only 9 Australian athletes to have crossed 4 Olympic Games, that stands above the others as being really special?
Yeah, Tokyo was obviously pretty special because it'd been my 4th Olympics and the first 3 didn't go that well. And a little bit out of my control. I was sick and then I was injured, and then just Rio sort of coming back from plantar fascia surgery that took a lot longer than we thought, and I was just on the back foot the whole year. Just being able to sort of, run 1:45.4, I think I ran in the heat of an Olympics. That was pretty special. And I just remember being so nervous because when you sort of have those bad races at the Olympics, they add up and they get in your head a bit. And I just remember sort of standing under this thing, and I was just like, and I'd been training with Pete and he'd been sort of just handing it to me in the last rep of the sessions. And I was just like, damn, like I wanted to like really go him in the last rep, but he was just streaming away from me. And I was like, shit, maybe I'm not going as well as I thought. And then I saw him run like 1:44.1 walking across the line. And I was just like, okay, we're okay. We're on. So that felt great. Com Games was just one of the most incredible 5 days of my career because I just had 5 races in 5 days and just kept backing up. And I come away with 2 fifths. And when I look back on that, and even when I chat with my old coach, Andrew Russell, like we weren't even in that good a shape. But I think that was the kind of moment, like people talk about flow and like just being in that kind of moment. That was probably the moment of my career that was just like really surreal. And sort of, because I obviously left my old coach, Nick Bordeaux, because I was just really struggling at major championships and just didn't think I was prepared well. And that was a real sort of turning point in my career because like a lot of people had sort of talked about me, he can run fast and, but he chokes at major champs and all that sort of stuff. So that was just a really kind of real good point in my career. Just being able to race 5 days, like, you take caffeine, you winding down at 2-3 a.m, you're kind of sleeping through, it was just like this routine for 5 days. It was just crazy. And I think even, I missed a medal by 0.06, I think, in the 8. And then I think if I had have been a little bit more aggressive in the 15, like I was coming from third last or something and finished fifth again. Like I ran a pretty incredible last 300. If I had been maybe a bit more confident with myself, I maybe could have been a bit closer up, but that was pretty awesome. And then, 2011, I had a pretty good series of events, like on the Diamond League sort of circuit. Like I won the 1K in Ostrava in 2016, and beat Adam Schott and a bunch of good guys. And then I went to Oslo, and I think that's probably one of my favorite races because it was absolutely stacked. And I finished fifth in 3:52 too, and it was pouring down with rain. And with 200 to go, I was right on the back of Kiprop, and they just kind of streaked away from me in the last 100. But that was, it's not that often we have, guys. Well, I guess it's a little bit more often now, but especially back then, guys weren't really doing that. So that was a bit of a highlight as well. Yeah,
as in Australian guys, Jeff, weren't necessarily there at the pointy end on the track. Middle distance. Yeah,
I think in general though, back in those days, I've sort of been thinking a fair bit about it. There just seemed to be a lot more Kenyan athletes sort of around. We didn't have this sort of situation, with Stewie and Jacob and Ollie. Nick Willis was kind of like the shining light in, when I sort of talk about more European, Western kind of. Yeah, so it's awesome to see the guys sort of running so well and up there in these races because before it was sort of unheard of. I remember the big Mzungo DVD that Nike brought out with Mottram, and he was the big white guy that was taking it to the Africans, and it was sort of unheard of. And now we sort of see it kind of a lot more, which is kind of nice just to see that resurgence.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw Tom DeCano posted that DVD up on his social media, a picture of it recently, actually, that Craig Mottram Run for Your Life DVD, I think it was.
The mullet he was sporting.
that 1,000 metres that you referenced there, 2:16.09, 2014, that's still the Oceanic 1,000 metre record. That's hard to get your head around, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think it would last very long, to be honest. It's not a very oftenly run race. I reckon Pete could get he could probably beat it relatively easily, especially after his 3:35 the other day. But that 2014, I wasn't even in that good a shape. I just kind of got a good race. I think if I had that kind of race in other periods of my career, maybe I might have run 2:14 high. Because I think that was kind of the 1K was kind of like my real sweet spot. And a lot of people obviously throughout my career debated, am I better at 800? Am I better at 1500? And, we have to remember all my PBs are sort of from 2009 pre-Super Shoe. So I think I can claim maybe I was the first sub 330 guy. Nah. So I sort of, the 1K is sort of, in that sweet spot, you know what I mean, for me. And it was kind of that real nice mix of endurance and just that sort of speed reserve. So, yeah.
It's a unique distance. Jeff, in transition out, you've referenced some of your coaching sequence, if you like, Andrew, Nick, Andrew, Justin in the final sort of stages, Rinaldi. What counsel were you seeking? Obviously, you explained or described those inner murmurings you're getting that maybe it's time to call stumps on the career, but what sort of counsel were you getting outside of your own head, coaching-wise or parents or significant others? Was there anyone sort of challenging your thinking to say maybe stay longer, or people generally supportive?
Yeah, sort of a tough one. I sort of found it obviously hard to find counsel in Justin just because he was my coach. And I think is that you don't want to kind of let him down. Do you know what I mean? Because he just puts in so much effort, and I was always so grateful for that. But throughout sort of, especially the back half of my career, I've had a psychologist that is sort of a little bit of my go-to. Had some mental health sort of stuff in 2017, and then sort of on from there, she was just a bit of a sounding board for me. So, just kind of what was in my head. I just sort of get a little bit of clarity and just some strategies, and obviously reading, and especially about psychology and leadership and all those sorts of things. So my psychologist ended up sort of transitioning more into not like a mentor, but you know what I mean, like more of a performance coach that you can kind of throw ideas at and, you know, speak around different things. So she was incredibly helpful. My parents were obviously significantly involved. So yeah, there was definitely some sort of people, but it was just sort of a pretty rapidly like changing situation. Like I was all in, and then it's just like I got racing and things just weren't coming out well, and I wasn't recovering well, and it was just sort of getting hard. I wasn't sort of willing to do those things that I used to be able to do, and the sacrifices that I was making to do the sport were no longer like sustainable. You know what I mean? Like you can sacrifice for so long if you're kind of really doing something you kind of want to do, you know, and that's sort of other things in life, whether it's friends or relationships or work, or, you know, I'm really good at saying no to things, but I just couldn't, you know, those things were just getting louder and louder. Like I committed my career, like my whole life to 15 years of doing it. It's a pretty big sacrifice. Well, not a sacrifice because I enjoyed every moment of it, but it's sort of like that it does come at a bit of a cost. So it sort of crept up pretty quick. And yeah, once I kind of knew, I just knew. Also, one of my good friends, Henry Frayne, who's a long jumper, we've been on the last 3 Olympic teams together. We're sort of similar age, and, you know, we're both at that point now where we go into Australian teams and we're so old that we don't really know anyone. So yeah, he's always been someone who's a real straight shooter and who just tell it how it is. So yeah, lucky to have had a lot of good support.
You mentioned 2 things that jumped out there, Jeff. Engaging psychology, a psychologist over the years, sports-based, performance-based, which I just think's so important. And then also, you know, if you're happy to touch around the 2017, you said you had some mental health challenges, which I think it's so refreshing to see this so openly discussed now. I don't think there's a soul on the planet that goes from the cradle to the grave without periods of it, myself included, whatever that may be. And it's just nice to hear people talking about the challenges at times. Are you happy to share what that period looked like, or no problems if not, of course?
Yeah, no, it's fine. 2015, I was in the best shape of my career. Like when people look at it and the results, they don't really see it, but like some of the things I was doing in training were out of control. Like I did 4x400 on 4 minutes recovery. I think I averaged 50.5. I think I went 51 flat for the first one, and then I think I went 50.6, 49.7, 50.2 or something. It was pretty disgusting. And then I did 3 150s, I think, in 18.5. And it was lactic city, but like I was in, you know, I ran 144.9 on I think 130K week. Like I was doing some pretty insane stuff that year. And the sport can be pretty politically, especially with managers and different things. And I was just having trouble getting into the races I kind of needed to. So I was like all in on world champs. And yeah, the last session before I was about to fly from Cologne to Japan for our pre-departure camp, I just sort of tweaked my plan in a fraction. I was like, well, that's a bit weird. And I didn't sort of think too much of it. But then I got on the plane on a long haul flight. By the end, it was just throbbing. And so then we sort of locally injected that to be able to race, or we put a cortisone in it as well, and then locally injected it for the race so that I could race, and ended up rupturing my plantar in the race. And in that heat, I just cruised through. I think I was second last at 200, but I'd gone through YouTube and I'd watched all the previous heats from the previous world champs. I think it was in Moscow. And I timed the last 200 of every single race. And if you ran 26.5 for the last 200, you're pretty comfy. So I didn't panic. I knew I was sweet, rolled down the outside, automatic qualifier. I was like, yeah, I'm on. And then the local wore off and I realized I ruptured my plantar and I was in the most pain I've ever been in my life. And that just kind of set the tone for 2016, because a couple of days later I'm flying home. You know, I just fly home from Beijing, and the next day I'm on the surgery table. And I was pretty relaxed about it because I'd already had the previous planner done in 2010. So I kind of knew the recovery, but I think because I ruptured this one, there was just so much scar tissue that we just sort of didn't get the same result. And basically I just sort of didn't really get training until February 2016 for the Olympics. And that whole year, it was just like every day I had to kind of maximize to be able to get to the Olympics. I just had to be 120%, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. And Yeah, I think at that stage I probably had some really bad coping strategies as well. Like my sort of thing was, if I can control every part of my life and work harder than everyone, then I'll be good. And this sounds good, but it's not very sustainable. Anyway, I ran 1:45.1 in London Diamond League right before going to Rio, and I was like, okay, we're back. But I hadn't sort of probably had that history of work under my belt, and the travel into Rio was just insane. Like I flew 30 hours to get from Cologne to Florida for our camp, and then had to go from, and then 3 or 4 days before we had an overnight flight from Florida to Rio. And I was the very first morning of the athletics program. And I was in a really good heat. It was actually quite fast and I was in the right positions, but I was just left like really wanting. Like I was just cooked in the last 100. And I think it was just the travel and the jet lag. And Pete really struggled as well. Luke had a really bad, like the morning session was horrible, especially for the 8 guys. But the next day, the women's 15 girls competed really well. And I just think that extra 24 hours of being in the village and over a bit of the flight and stuff sort of helped. So that sort of, yeah, it was just really tough, you know, because I just put so much into it. So I left the village before the closing ceremony and I flew back to Europe because I was just like really determined to sort of finish the season off and show that like I was better than that, because it's just the 3rd Olympics that I just stuffed up, and like I was just doing a lot of sort of reflecting and yes, and I was just so determined. Like I left the Olympics, like most people are dying to go to the Olympics. I was there for about 6 days, you know. I was just so committed to what I was doing, and I sort of flew myself back to Europe, and I was like, I can get some training done while everyone's still over there. I can come out and I can make some most of these races. And I just remember kind of walking through Cologne, and it's one of the most beautiful cities and one of my favorite places to base in Europe. And I just remember like breaking down in the street and just like crying. And I was just like so overwhelmed with anxiety, and I was just exhausted because I had all this stuff and I just kind of wasn't dealing with it. It just kind of got to a point where like I was doing something I love and it was like just making me really unhappy. You know, and it's a pretty tough sport. Like, you know, at that stage, my coach Andrew Russell, and I reached out to him and we sort of came up with a plan. And, you know, I flew to Slovakia for a race, but like people sort of don't see this side of the sport, but like I flew there on my own. Like you get picked up by a random person, you're in a meat hotel, you know, sometimes you know people, sometimes you don't, because it's like such a big sport. And like I was just there on my own, you know, and struggling with mental health and having to perform. And I think I still ran 1:46 high. So like I was still performing okay, but I was just overwhelmed and the anxiety got worse, and I just started having like panic attacks, and I sort of ended up eventually sort of heading home. And I just had days like at home where, you know, my Nike contract had just finished. You know, so there's a lot of uncertainty around that. You know, I just broke up with a long-term girlfriend, and a lot of like the support in my life had kind of gone, if that kind of makes sense. As I said, I was just having massive panic attacks. My mentality in my mind was just like, you're not good enough. Just like negative, like all the things, like just focusing on all the things I couldn't do. And just like absolutely spiraled for the next few months. Saw a psychologist, that kind of wasn't working that well. So then we started seeing a psychiatrist, because I'd be waking up like 2 a.m. in the morning. And as soon as I woke up and my brain turned on, it was just like problem solving, and like I was just awake all night and wasn't sleeping. And then I was sort of trying to train because like I was trying to get back, like I did the nitro thing that was came into town, and just kept having to up the sleeping tablets, and I'd wake up in the morning drooling, and I'd be going off my runs and it felt like my heart was pumping out of my chest because like of all the meds I was on. And I had a bit of an injury, and we didn't really know what it was. And I don't know, it was in my ankle, and I was on anti-inflammatories. And I think it was just that point where my body was like, hey mate, if you don't like take a step back here, you're going to be in a real bad place. So I kind of had a pretty serious discussion with my psychiatrist around antidepressants and like all medication. And I decided not to go down that road. And decided to take sort of 8 weeks off running because I was also injured, and I ended up taking a flight to taking a trip to Africa. So I think 3 or 4 days later, I took off with about 9 kilos in my bag. I had enough sleeping tablets for about 60 days. And yeah, rolled into Nairobi, and I'd always had an affinity with Africa, I think just because of like running and a 10 and, you know, just all the stories. And so, yeah, when I look back, I'm like, wow, I can't believe my parents let me travel when I was in that state. But yeah, kind of jumped onto a camping tour and ended up doing 49 days from, I think 11,500 kilometers in an old bus camping, going from Nairobi sort of down towards Cape Town. And yeah, woke up for the sunrise, watched the sunset, tried to be present and not be trying to fast forward time. I think athletes are always trying to fast forward time because we're always trying to get to the goal as quick as we can. My trip was actually meant to be shorter, and I got to Big Falls and I was meant to go towards Joburg, but my brain was already starting to think ahead and all the things that I could do. And I was like, nah, you got to go longer. So I changed my trip and went towards Cape Town. Didn't take any of my sleeping tablets while I was on the trip, which was pretty awesome. Read a few books, and yeah, just went for some life perspective, basically. You know, like I'm pretty lucky. Like I've had a pretty good quality of life, but I just couldn't see that at the time. And I just kind of, yeah, needed some perspective and some gratitude. And yeah, it was tough. But yeah, I think I just went so hard at the sport for the first bunch of my career. And I think my first coach didn't really probably pay enough attention to the kind of the mental side and even sort of the coaching and empathy and, you know, being a part of like just having athletes even a part of the process and stuff. I just sort of learned probably some bad habits, and I probably got too motivated at times and tried to block out too many things. And just, yeah, I think I just created some sort of unhealthy, that was sort of healthy in a way because it's kind of what made me a good athlete. But it also sort of, I think probably didn't help it as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, Jeff, thanks for sharing and being so transparent. I think it's very refreshing for people to hear that, you know, people that have had careers like yourself have had their battles without, obviously, evidently, along the way, including, you know, some of the psychological duress. And you said there that athletes are so good at fast forwarding time. Some of the very characteristics that I think underpin your high performance and high achievement is also the double-edged sword, right? It's that performance anxiety that can creep in, the overwhelm.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating. I've seen it, observed it so many times. My 16-year physio career, athletes that, you know, at some point in their career start developing panic attacks. And it's really quite a fascinating case study, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like especially track and field and, you know, and obviously my experience in middle distance, it's brutal. Like it's ruthless.
Brutal.
And you only see your name with the result. No one sees any of the stuff that goes in behind. There's no hiding. It's not a skill. It's basically physiology. So it's whatever you got it on the day. Yep. And there's just nowhere really ever to hide. Like you got to get your preparation so good. And you got to be, you know, time it so well to get that kind of one result that quite often, you know, your career can hinge on. So it's, yeah, there can be some really tough parts of a career and really stressful. And, you know, athletes, I think, and even federations have sort of got to do, you know, the right work in sort of educating and sort of making sure our athletes are prepared for those kind of situations and have this coping skills. And I just didn't think I quite had them. Yeah, there's, you know, mental health is obviously one sort of part of it, but there's, you know, it's being able to, like, you can have someone who can cope with this, like has good strategies and like good coping mechanisms to cope with it. And you can have people that don't. So they'll be affected like very differently. And that was, I guess, the work of when I sort of got back from Africa was like, well, how do I prevent that from happening? What do I need to do? You know, I've read so many books on psychology and just high performance and sort of, yeah, I kind of learned what worked for me and what were my triggers and kind of what I needed to sort of be better at. So always learning basically in the sport. You think you're sort of going well, but you can get knocked back pretty quick.
I mean, I think you used two words there, brutal and ruthless. I often reflect on high performance environments, and that's a word that often flows off the tongue. It's quite brutal. It's you see the results, but you don't see always behind the scenes. The withdrawal of sponsorship. I've observed athletes working through that process over the years, and that, to me, you said it's like a withdrawal of support. Obviously, it is, but that's tough as well. It's kind of like, well, we're not seeing value in the investment at the moment. I mean, anyone would struggle with that, whether it's the corporate space, employment. That's it's basically a withdrawal in belief.
Yeah, and that was probably one of the hardest things. The back half of my career was, it just kind of felt like no one really outside of my inner circle, Justin, my family, no one really saw value in what I was doing. You know what I mean? Like, you get to that age where you're past marketing ability, like your marketing's kind of out the window, and I'm training my ass off. Like, I'm sort of doing everything I can. And, I got top 20 at Olympics. Like, it could have been top 10 if I had been able to finish the race properly. No one really saw value in that other than, some shoes here and there and some things like that, which I obviously greatly appreciated. And obviously I have physios and stuff like Andrew Lambert who, treat like he's more of a friend, but he treated me for so long. And I had some unbelievable people in my circle, and that's why I think I was able to have the longevity I had. But you're right. It's that value proposition. You don't really feel like anyone's giving any. Like AA didn't really check in with me at all at any part of my sort of later half of my career. I actually found out when I was in Africa that I got moved off NAS support. So while I was trying to deal with my mental health, that was a bit of a kick in the guts.
And hence, Jeff, the reflection and the reality that high performance is just brutal. It's brutal. But you've endured, and what would you've endured, and you've exited with dignity. What would you say, Jeff Riseley's top 3 longevity tips for athletes? And it doesn't have to be the elite athlete, but what are the 3 characteristics people need to enjoy durability in sport, Jeff?
My biggest thing is I just used to try and do the basics really well. So that might be as simple as get up at the same time, have the same routine for breakfast, 2 slices of toast, a coffee before I run at, say, 9 a.m. That was just my routine, even from a recovery point of view, I always had my drinks and stuff when I went to a session ready for post-session. I just tried to do the basics of what makes a good athlete as well as I could, because I knew that would get me 90% of the way, and then I could kind of focus on the things that I guess got the extra little bit. So that was probably the biggest thing. Durability is a tough one because I did have longevity and I did have durability, but I did have a career that was just hammered by injuries. That, I think ultimately sort of held me back from probably achieving what I should have. I just never kind of got that continuity of year-on-year performances. I'd have a really good year, and then it's all of a sudden I'm on the surgery table, or, I've got OP, or, and I'm out for a year, and then it's like, all right, I got to quickly kind of get back for the next year. And then so I went through, and I think what we're kind of seeing, with, Stewie, I remember racing Stewie in 2018 in a 1500, and I don't think he broke 340. Central Wits didn't run that one. He ran the 1500 in Sydney, but it was in Brisbane right before the Com Games. 2018 is not that long ago, and he didn't break, his PB wasn't under 340, but he went to Europe, he ran 334, and he's just built these world-class performances over the last 4 years that's got him to this point. And I think once you kind of get to that point and you're consistently running those times, then you just got to have a little bit of luck at a major champs and have good timing, and you'll get a medal. like we see it with Lewandowski, probably one of the most consistent guys of the circuit for the last 15 years. Like he snagged a bronze in Doha. Like if you are turning up often enough in good shape, eventually you're going to have a good performance. But I just never kind of got that continuity, you know, because I just had so many injuries. Like Stewie comes back from I think it was a 2020 season when the Olympics were cancelled, and rocks up to Penguin and runs 350 for a mile. That's because that's where his head's at. It's like, that's standard. Like he's built up like this, like history and of good performances, and that's why he kind of goes out and runs well, even when, you know, he's having some issues with COVID boosters or whatever. He's still out there trying to run 56 seconds for the first lap because he's just like, that's just where that's his mentality, you know, and that comes from just a repeat of like, it's like muscle memory in a way. So yeah, I guess that doesn't answer your top three, does it?
It does, Jeff, raise some great delineation that you said you feel like you had longevity, but not necessarily durability, because that continuity you didn't feel was always there season upon season, building consistency. So I think that's an interesting point. But the first one, which I think is brilliant, do the basics really well. You said it takes you 90% of the way there. Yeah.
And I was really good. Like I have no problem going out with friends and not having a drink, or, you know, like I love surfing. I can say no to that. Like I'm good at, you know, sort of saying no to the things that, you know, you kind of really want to do them, but you know, like, and it might not matter at the end of the day, but it's sort of like enough of those things add up in time. Yeah. So, you know, it's another silly one, but small wins eventually add up to big wins. And I think that's probably what I've sort of found most important when you're rehabbing injury or you're kind of going through a rough patch, is not to be so focused on the outcome, but it's sort of like, okay, well, today I ran an extra only run an extra 2 minutes, but it was 2 minutes further than I ran the day before, or, you know, I pulled up well, or, you know, it's sort of, you know, you're in that relationship with a physio where you're struggling to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you just got to kind of really like believe in the process. And it's sort of, you just got to kind of take all the small wins along the way. Like, you know, I've been having some really good dialogue with Jai Edwards, who's had some Achilles issues. And I'm just like, mate, like, I know it's tough because everyone's overseas is racing, but like your volumes are going up. You just got to kind of like take as many of these small wins as you can and just keep focusing, and your time will come. So, yeah, I think small wins over time add up to big wins. And then I think just my longevity, I think I was sort of just pretty lucky. I especially like Andrew Russell. He's probably our number one high performance manager in the country. Like, 3 or 4 grand finals with Hawthorn. He's got Carlton going really well right now. So he just taught me a hell of a lot about high performance. And I think that's sort of one of the things, especially with like young kids coming through in our sport, they kind of need a good coach who can teach them a lot about high performance, because there's going to be a situation where they might be racing over in Europe and they've had to go and find an Airbnb on their own, and they've probably had to hire a bicycle or figure out, you know, a train ticket to be able to get to training. Like, they're not in an AFL environment where they got 50 coaches to guide there and hold their hand along the way. Like, you've got to be able to make decisions when quite often your coach is back in Melbourne asleep with time zone changes. So you've actually sort of got to become really, really good at managing your career and managing the people within your career, and sort of learning along the way to be able to make those decisions that can be crucial. And I think you see a lot of athletes that just sort of don't have the ability to make those kind of decisions, either because they're just so motivated, or they're stubborn, or they don't want to miss the program, or, you know, and I've been like that before. But it's sort of, yeah, just being able to sort of make good, you know, like I didn't coach myself, and JR was like incredible for me for the last year, but I took on sort of a lot of the roles sort of in the background and the motivation stuff. Like, you know, like I was sort of kind of, I guess, managing my career and yeah, I think I got to the Olympics just because I was pretty determined and I was ruthless, and that was just all the lessons I learned. And I was just a really good high performance manager, basically.
And hence, hopefully, Jeff, and no doubt your next career into high performance will be there. You've developed the skills. But I want to state these here, Jeff, your top 3 longevity tips. 1, do the basics really well. 2, small wins add up to big wins. And 3, manage your career / crucial decisions along the way. So I think that's beautiful reflection. Jeff, are you ready for a rapid fire series of questions? We call it the performance round. Here we go. This is your session for the day.
Yeah.
Training session most disliked?
Probably 8 by 600 meter hills up Lansdowne Street. They just, especially when you're doing with 3 and 5K guys, they just burned real bad.
Training session most loved?
I didn't love it, but we did the 4x400 session a lot. And when I did that well, I kind of knew I was in good shape. But, I love doing K reps. I love threshold. I just love training. I love rocking up with my group and seeing them run well and working together and just everyone kind of, I guess committed to different goals, but kind of the same goals and helping each other. So I just love training, basically.
Favorite pre-race meal? What would fuel Jeff Riseley typically?
Some kind of like pasta, whether it be just a spag bowl or something with some veggies in it, just for a bit of everything. But just something sort of easy that sat well and didn't come up post race, I guess.
Bedtime, morning time. Aside from obviously periods where, as you say, your sleep was hampered, what was your typical routine like? Jeff, you said you did the basic things really well. Was that like get to bed on time? I think you referenced that already.
Yeah, well, I think as a disclaimer, we have to say that for most of my career, I was a professional athlete and it wasn't like a 9-to-5 job. Like it was kind of different. But probably like 10:30, 7:30. And it was always like train 9:30 or 5:30 for this afternoon run. That was non-negotiable.
Yep. Who's the athlete Jeff Riseley most admires and why?
Nick Willis. We sort of come up at the same time, and I just remember just watching the way he raced and the way he's able to measure his races. Like I think when he ran 3:29 in Monaco, he was like at the back and just ran through. And Jacob Ingebrigtsen kind of reminds me a lot of Nick and how he constructs his races. Like when he ran that 12:48, he got gapped by about 10-15 meters in Florence for that 5K, and they went through in like 7:48, but he didn't panic. He just kind of gradually over the next 2 laps worked his way up, and then he was there at the end and won the race. So I think those guys, they just had that ability to really sort of hone in on their effort and just their racecraft. Just that's what I loved about them, and that's why and obviously Nick is probably he's even more longevity in his career than what I had. So and multiple Olympic medalists. So he did things I wasn't able to do, even though, like, especially early in my career, we had some real big battles. So,
two great case studies in longevity, all the same. Jeff, toughest competitor you ever raced? Who was that and why?
Toughest competitor? Me and Ryan Gregson always had some pretty heated battles, and there was a period like where we're both coached by Nick, and he used to like to kind of send us head to head. I think we're both like very different athletes and very different personalities, and I always used to just not really want him to be on my shoulder with 110 to go. It was a nightmare kind of territory, but I knew like he had that change of pace over 4 or 5 meters that could win races. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, fascinating. Was there a mantra, Jeff, that you'd regularly use, self-talk? Anything that sticks out across your career, your 15 years, or did it change?
Not really. Like a question I get a lot is, who's your favorite sports star growing up? And I never really cared about any of that stuff. I just did what I kind of liked doing, I guess, and what felt right. And I love running, so I just went at it. And I never really had any mantras.
Easy. Best recovery tip, Jeff, what would that be?
Probably like food for me. Like I just kind of knew if I got in like, my 75 grams of carbs and 20 grams of protein, like pretty much in a drink form straight after, that was sort of like having a meal, and that just kind of got that process started. Also running. I think sometimes running, like, just the next day after, especially like a real hard anaerobic workout, can really suck. But just getting the mechanics and the legs ticking over in any kind of capacity just kind of help just to kind of get the body springing back into shape.
And all the runners rejoice with that. One word to describe your racing style, what would that be?
I don't know. I just think I sort of had that ability to kind of run a real big last lap and not a kind of like a massive wind up in the same way that, say, maybe like a Matt Ramsden does. So I had a lot more sort of top end speed, but yeah, just that ability to maintain sort of high paces for a long time. I think that's kind of what my strength was in the end.
And how would you, Jeff, describe being in the zone? You mentioned that there was that golden 5-day period at the Commonwealth Games where you felt like you were just in flow. But how would you describe being in the zone? Is it just being in flow?
Yeah, it's like your mind's really quiet. You're not kind of overthinking anything. You're kind of seeing everything that's happening. It's just you're just able to sort of, I guess, be in that moment. And it doesn't happen very often because athletes are just chronic overthinkers. And one of the things I always did in the call room was I'd take a hacky sack with me and I just like throw it from hand to hand, like basically at the rhythm I was about to go and run at, if you know what I mean. So people, my competitors saw me, they're like, what the hell is this guy doing? But that was me. I tried to just feel everything as much as I could. And it was sort of breathing and closing your eyes and just sort of bringing yourself back and getting the heart rate down and just sort of, trying as much as I can to lock into everything I do in a training field, because training essentially is exactly what a race is. It's just a little bit more on the line, I guess.
Gosh, there might be some hacky sacks sneaking into their call rooms now, Jeff. And Jeff, the final question in the performance round, we know that epic sessions alone don't make champions, but can you reflect on the hardest session you can ever recall? You already referenced that 4x400 followed by 3 150s, I think it was. Is that it?
Yeah.
Is that the one that stands out above all others, or it's hard to?
Yeah, there's that one. There was a period in 2015, like I said, I had some of the craziest sessions. There's another one I think I did 600, 500, 400, 300, 200. So we started with a 1200 in 64s. And then I think I ran the 600 in like 126. I think the 500 was in 53. I think the 400 was in 50.0. The 300 was in 36.0. And then I think I ran 24 flat-ish for the last one, for the last two. So that was tough. I did a session here before I ran 335 in Melbourne, and I just moved houses, and it was chaos week for me. And Gregson beat me that race, and I hated it. But that sort of the week before, I did 4 600s in 126 on 4 minutes recovery, so sort of similar to the 4 400 session, but for the 15. And I think it kind of still a little bit of fatigue kind of crept into that 15 race, and I just couldn't quite finish. Gregson got me in the last, I think, 70. But then the next week I came back and ran 145.2, I think, against Rhodesia. So I was in red hot shape. So that was another tough one. But yeah, I have an Excel spreadsheet with all the hardest sessions I've ever done in them. It's just for some nostalgia to reflect on.
That's brilliant. First time that's come up. Jeff, in 330 episodes, an Excel spreadsheet of the hard workouts.
That's called the session bank.
The session bank at some point that should see public eyes when you're ready for that. But I remember that run against Rhodesia. That was a standout for sure. That was an amazing performance.
Yeah, that was a good 2-week period. That was, and then I went, and I think 2 weeks after that I won the double at Brisbane. I had won the 800 and 1500 in the same weekend. So
yeah, the purple patch. Jeff, well done. You're out of the performance round. Final 2 questions here. You've already shared so generously and openly, which we appreciate. But if you had to boil everything you've learned across the 15-year career, and the fact that you're still learning, like you say, you're still immersing yourself in high performance, reflecting on your career, what would you say would be the single piece of advice you'd espouse to help listeners of this show perform at their physical best? It's a tough question.
I guess if we're kind of relating it to me, and I've obviously done a lot of reflecting in this last sort of 3-4 months, it's sort of having that view to longevity, it's even more of a development mentality, especially with young athletes. I think they're just so driven to kind of want success yesterday. I think because of social media and the pressure, and like the kids are just under a lot of pressure to be kind of doing things that look sensational, for whether it's for their peers or for Instagram or whatever, and they kind of lose sight of where they're kind of actually going. And in our sport, especially like 5K, like it's such an endurance, like it takes years and years to kind of put work into it's like writing a book, you know what I mean? So yeah, sort of having that kind of long-term view, and not like, I sort of didn't really have that long-term view, and I just kind of flew all around the world trying to do all these races as a 20-year-old, and ended up with a navicular stress fracture. And I just and that was the problem with the early part of my career. I think that real kind of key from 20 to 24, I basically spent every second year injured. So I think, and it's probably more advice to coaches, then it's hard to actually for coaches to get this through to their athletes, but just to have that kind of long-term view of where you kind of need to go, and break down that development with like milestones along the way, like it might be a 13:55K, and then the next year it might be 13:35, and then, you might only get to 13:30, and then you have that big breakthrough. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of understanding kind of where you are on that performance trajectory and where you're going, and sort of also motivating them, and giving them enough to, not want to go and do too much. So yeah, I think it's just have a really good plan, especially developmental plan for young athletes, and understanding the sport and where they need to be. And, even the financial side of the sport, like you sort of need to be running pretty well in your early 20s by 22, 23 for a company to kind of get on. Like, so there's some sort of urgency, but you can't be complacent. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, managing those lines to be able to sort of best prepare the athletes and not only do the sport for a long time, but to be able to financially kind of do the sport and be in the right systems and the right places, because doors start closing the older you get. You know what I mean? You don't fit into a NASA matrix, or, you know what I mean? Like, could be as simple as that. So yeah, it's just having like really good developmental plans, I think, and not always looking only 3 months down at like the bright, shiny stuff, trying to see past it and what does it look like and where do we need to be, and what is that part on the longer journey.
That's powerful, Jeff. As a practitioner, a physiotherapist, sports physio by trade, it's something we're often trying to educate, and it's a challenge athletes in that boom bust cycle of injury to start planning about where you can be in 3 or 4 seasons rather than this season. And it's a challenge for all of us, but it's that duality of need to have performance now and all the things that come with that, whether it's a contract or Instagram fame or whatever the draw cards may be.
And it takes time to develop capacity, like, whether it's power, speed, strength, like, getting your body up to a point where it can actually tolerate load as well. Like that's nearly the hardest thing, because if you want to be a really good 5K guy, if you can't run between 140 and 160K, you're not really going to make it. And like, I coach Zach Patterson, who finished 5th at World Juniors, and he's just had his second Achilles surgery. He's had both his left and right done, and like his body couldn't handle it. So he had to go and do some crazy stuff, because he can run 1340 on 90K a week, but it's not going to get him anywhere.
Gosh, it's
there's things that you need to be able to do as an athlete. Otherwise, there's kind of no point being in the sport as well. So you kind of got to work to get those things up. But it's chipping away as well. It's tough. And it's fun though. It's, last year was awesome sitting in Font Romeu with Jai Edwards and Ed Trippers and sipping coffees and training, and like that's the stuff you live for. So keep running. It's not that. It's rewarding as well. It's tough.
Right, look, Jeff, you shared so well. And final question here: what is Jeff Riseley's physical challenge going to be to listeners for the week?
So I've been embarking on. Some would probably call it beach weights routine for the last 3 or 4 months. So I've gone from 74 kilos to 82 kilos. Now I'm hoping most of that's muscle, but so I've been smashing the gym like you'd not believe. And I have a greater respect for some of our sort of strength athletes and stuff, because it is hard to and I know my body's type's probably not conditioned to that, but it's hard to put on weight. So at the moment in the gym, I'm trying to do 100 tricep extension like in a row.
100 reps.
Yeah. And I'm only doing 7.5 kilos, and it's just fatigue's absolute hell out of my poor little triceps. So at the moment I'm breaking it down into like 3 sets of 33 with like 10 seconds recovery, but I'm trying to get to 100 in a row because that's what the guy who wrote my program told me I should do.
Wow. And that's
I looked at him and I was like, mate, I don't know if this is like the greatest loading program. So I just got a program in my gym because I was like, I kind of just interested to see what they do, because I need to kind of learn a little bit more about this stuff. So he's got me doing 100 tricep extension. So
we'll call it the Jeff Riseley 100 tricep extension challenge. And just to clarify, they're not skull crushers on a bench. They're in a cable machine, yeah?
Yeah, cable machine with like the two, I don't know what those things called. The 2 ropes, yeah. And you just start at like 90 degree and you go down.
Yep. Oh, yeah, actually standing, not overhead.
Standing and not overhead. No, standing.
Standing and pulling through. And we may see the metamorphosis of Jeff Riseley into the next Ryan Hall post-professional running career.
Yeah, no, I kind of want to get to a point where I'm sort of somewhere between 85 and 90 kilos and I'm sort of functionally strong because I kind of learn as an athlete we get just really good at running in a straight line and we're not very good left to right. So obviously studying my master in high performance sport, I'm interested in this sort of thing. So I'm just trying to see what my body can do at the moment. But I think I'll probably run a marathon next year as well. So I'll probably lose all the weight that I put on.
Mic drop, Jeff. That's exciting. Any?
Oh no, like maybe just like a sub 3 hour just to be out there doing it. So my brother's running Melbourne this year, but I'm going to be in Princeton coaching, so I wasn't able to do it with him this year. But hopefully next year I'll do a marathon with him and we'll try and break 3 hours.
All right. Well, that's good to clarify. But Gold Coast 2023, Jeff, we'd welcome you up here.
Yeah. And I want to do it when I'm like 85 kilos. So it's like a real tough way to do it. But I want to do it the hard way. So,
well, that's what I run at, Jeff. So I can vouch for that. But mate, thank you for your time today. You are, in many ways, a real icon of the Australian athletics scene. And I recall reading Run for Your Life mags with Jeff Riseley plastered all over them and throughout the pages. And so thank you for sharing. Thanks for your contribution to the show. And we certainly all wish you all the best with this next phase. And we know that you'll be equally as successful in this next chapter, Jeff.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thanks again, mate.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Brad. It was great.